All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on the USAID-funded Empowered Entrepreneur Training Program, led by Winrock International in collaboration with Johns Hopkins University and the Visionaria Network, which is part of the larger USAID and Winrock Developing a Sustainable Cook Stove Sector project. My name is Alyssa Derby from Winrock International, and I will be leading us on the webinar today with support from Liz Kendall back in Winrock's home office. Next slide, Liz. Today's speakers include four of us. We'll start with Pam Baldinger, who's the Senior Energy Advisor for USAID and manages the Developing a Sustainable Cook Stove project from USAID's side. Currently, I'm the project manager for the DSCS project. My name is Alyssa Derby from Winrock International. I'm filling in for Katie Gross, who has done most of the hard work on this project and is on leave through April, although I have had the privilege of participating in this project over the entire period of the project through the last 5 years. We're also joined by Anita Shankar of Johns Hopkins University, who is a lead author of the Empowered Entrepreneur Training Handbook, on which the program we'll be discussing today is based, a researcher and a co-conspirator on our Empowered Entrepreneur Training Program. And finally, we're joined by Genevieve Smith, who is also a lead author and co-conspirator on this project, and the director of the Visionaria Network. Next slide, please. Before we begin, I'd like to give you a brief intro to the webinar technology and controls. This webinar technology is an online interactive screen sharing software that allows you, the attendee, to view the presenter's screen and interact with the presenter throughout the presentation. In the upper right-hand side of your screen, you'll see the webinar console. You can use the buttons on the console sidebar that look like fast forward and rewind buttons to maximize and minimize the console. By pressing the button with the square inside, you can also maximize and minimize the webinar presentation on your computer screen. Next slide, please. At the bottom of the Maximize console, you'll notice a questions feature. You can maximize or minimize the questions pane by pressing the plus or minus signs next to it, and you can pop it out of the console into its own pane by pressing the triangle button. During the presentation, we'll be using the questions feature to ask questions of the presenters. You'll be prompted when to type your questions, and time permitting, answers to the questions will be shared with the entire audience at the end of the webinar. To minimize background noise, during the presentation, you'll be in listen-only mode. If you have any problems during the webinar, please use the questions feature to communicate with us, and we'll do our best to address your question. Finally, you may notice a mouse moving on the screen during the webinar. As we understand this can be distracting, we'll do our best to only use the mouse when necessary. Thank you. Next slide. I'd now like to introduce Pam Baldinger to say a few words about our project.
Thanks, Alyssa. Welcome, everybody, to today's webinar. As Alyssa said, my name is Pam Baldinger. I'm Senior Energy Advisor here in USAID Washington, and I manage the Developing a Sustainable Cook Stove Sector project for USAID, and that's the project that's hosting today's webinar. I just want to say a few words about why USAID is funding the Empowered Entrepreneur Training Program and what we hope to get out of it. And there's three main reasons. First, it brings together three areas of interest to us: energy access, women's empowerment, and entrepreneurship. And second, the activity was designed in such a way as to emphasize the collection of data so that we could really try to determine the impact of the program in a very concrete, tangible way in all three of these areas. Now, gathering quality data has proved challenging for many empowerment programs in particular, and you'll be hearing today about the exciting data, especially the quantitative data that we've been able to collect so far. This has not been an easy or a quick process, but an important one that the team has worked really hard on. And third, while the focus today is on the energy sector, especially those involved in the cook stove supply chain, the work that's been done is not technology specific, and we think it should be applicable to anyone working at the bottom of the pyramid, or for that matter, with any marginalized or disadvantaged population. Some of the companies we worked with sell small solar devices as well as cook stoves, and both men and women participated and benefited from the various trainings. So we believe the groundwork that we've begun to lay could be applicable across sectors and countries. And so with that, I'm going to hand this back to Alyssa so that you can hear about what we've been doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Let's go to the next slide. Great. So today, during the webinar, we'll be providing a broad overview of the Developing a Sustainable Cook Stove project, and we'll be talking about the Empowered Entrepreneur Training Handbook. This is the curriculum on which our training program is based. We'll also cover previous research findings that led us to want to use and roll out the handbook in our program. And we'll provide an overview of the Empowered Entrepreneur Training Program and our results to date. Next slide. The goal of the Developing a Sustainable Cook Stove Sector program is to develop sustainable markets for cook stoves, especially with respect to distribution and financing along the cook stove value chain. Early on in the project, we focused on access to finance, in Kenya specifically, working with local finance institutions to develop consumer and enterprise finance options. We have also focused on support to women along the cook stove distribution chain, which motivated us to develop this Empowered Entrepreneur Training Program, which is the focus of this webinar. Genevieve will now tell us about the handbook on which the Empowered Entrepreneur Training Program is based. Next slide, please.
Great, thanks, Alyssa. Good morning, everyone. So the Empowered Entrepreneur Training Handbook was designed for organizations that are currently working with or planning to work with women entrepreneurs and or sales agents, primarily in the clean cooking sector, although the handbook is applicable to the energy sector more broadly.
So this is just a quick introduction about how the Empowered Entrepreneur Training Handbook was developed. It was developed with the funding from the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves, and it was a collaboration between myself at Johns Hopkins University and Genevieve Smith at the Visionaria Network. And it was designed for any organization that was working with or planning to work with women and men, entrepreneurs and sales agents within the clean energy sector. However, it does have applicability for all entrepreneurs working either as micro-entrepreneurs or small business entrepreneurs. It has three primary parts to it. The main part of the handbook is, well, it's listed here as part 2, but it's actually the description of the 6-day curriculum that covers business, empowerment, and leadership training. That main handbook is supported by the Human-Centered Design Handbook that allows NGOs or any organization to use that curriculum but create a customized training for their own market base or their own entrepreneurs. We also have part 3, which is the participant packet that's used to support any trainings that are conducted on the ground. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, great. So the training topics, as I mentioned before, focus on business, agency-based empowerment, and leadership skills. In addition to that, we've tried to frame these topics to include an understanding of sex and gender. And we are focused on some key core competencies that we have determined to be critical for small businesses. You can see this diagram to the right, which at the very center is focused on personal power in terms of the personality capabilities that are important to build strong entrepreneurs. Flanked on each side for that business are planning and relationship building. Additionally, some important core competencies to build a strong business. Now, all of those core aspects are then helping to build the achievement, and all of the activities in the Empowered Entrepreneur training are designed to support a growth mindset and helping individuals to build their business. On that list is also a series of different topic areas, and you can see for the basic business and finance, we've covered all of the key components in business planning and business care to support those activities. The agency-based empowerment is probably one of the most unique aspects of this training, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But the focus is on building their personal capabilities, self-efficacy, and personal agency. The third aspect is to kind of build upon the technical skills from the business, to have the self-empowerment, and then take it to the next step of becoming that leadership, and to have those leadership skills to achieve continued growth for themselves and their business. And so that's how we've designed the curriculum in general. If we can move on to the next slide then. Before we continue, I thought it would be useful to explain a little bit more about what we mean by agency-based empowerment. So there are many different definitions of empowerment, but I want to call to your attention an important distinction. Empowerment can be divided into two primary components: resources and agency. So resources refer to those external inputs that help individuals improve their lives. This could include providing education, skill building, opportunities, or financing. And if you look closely at most entrepreneur empowerment programs, you'll find that they often focus on these resource-based activities. So in contrast, agency refers to those internal capabilities that help create the change. And this can include one's beliefs in themselves, their motivation, their desire to make a change, etc. So while many empowerment programs provide external resources, they have the hope that this internal agency will also improve. And in many cases, that's true. It does. However, we've found that in the case of challenging activities, such as starting or maintaining a new business, it requires a more focused effort on building agency. And the challenge of behavior change is even more difficult when it comes to women, who are generally more disempowered than men in most societies. From the literature related to female entrepreneurships globally, it's clear that women are more afraid of failure, they're more hesitant to take risks, they're less willing or able to take decisions related to important situations. And so we feel that this agency-based focus is particularly important for women entrepreneurs. Even when women are given the opportunity to provide their opinion or take action, in many of these societies we find that women are still less likely than men to do so. And it seems that what's stopping individuals is oftentimes their mindset. It's how they're thinking about their situation and the beliefs about what they can do to improve it. So our hypothesis was that if we were able to more directly foster agency, this would lead to more productive action for individuals. So we conducted a series of research studies to explore this topic in greater detail. Can you go to the next slide, please? So the handbook and the associated training processes were built from this evidence base of our research. In this slide, we're providing a general timeline for these activities, and it highlights our intention to systematically deploy this training program in a wide range of contexts and in a way that would allow us to assess their impacts under real-life conditions. So the primary evidence base for this handbook came from the original randomized control trial conducted in 2014 on agency-based empowerment that was conducted in Kenya by Johns Hopkins University in conjunction with EnviroFit and SVAC Kenya, a local NGO. I'll be giving a little bit more details on the results in a moment. After we had completed that trial, yeah, that's fine. You can, yeah, let's keep it on this slide. We also did some additional research in Bolivia in conjunction with the Visionaria Network and Set a Soul. By 2015, with the support of the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves, we were able to finalize the 6-day curriculum and make it available as an open source document. So in the past 2 years, as you've already heard from Pam and Alyssa, with support of USAID and Winrock, we began this Training of Trainers certification program where we were able to embed a robust monitoring and evaluation process that allowed us to follow the impacts of this training over time. Next slide, please. So kind of going back to the original research, I wanted to present some key findings to provide you with some context for the types of results that we were able to find from the randomized trial. I should also point out that we carried a series of pilot research studies prior to that trial to examine the impacts of this agency-based empowerment curriculum in the context of numerous disenfranchised populations in Kenya and in India. With that early work that showed significant impacts on overall well-being for these women, they had also improved economic conditions, enhanced relationships, and improved agency, we felt confident that this type of training could be beneficial to entrepreneurs within the clean energy sector. And with the support of the Alliance, we were able to conduct this first randomized controlled trial in Kenya with cook stove entrepreneurs. In the randomized controlled trial, we compared cook stove entrepreneurs, which included both men and women, who received either the traditional entrepreneurial training or business training, with those individuals who received the agency-based empowerment training, and they were followed over an 8-month period. Next slide, please. So in this graph, this shows you the overall sales that we found over the course of those 8 months of the trial. In the blue are the sales of the control group that got the standard entrepreneurial training, and the red line refers to those sales in the intervention group with the agency-based empowerment training. So a couple of points on this. It's clear from the graph that those in the intervention group were able to sell significantly more cook stoves than those in the control group. But the sales over time reveal some interesting patterns. Both groups had a relatively slow start in the beginning. Members in each group were meeting every 4 to 6 weeks to review their sales and determine how to overcome specific challenges. So it was hoped that they would be able to work together to identify what the challenges were and improve their sales strategies. Each group was following a format that was building upon what they had learned from their initial training. You can see after about 4 months, the intervention groups appear to be gaining some momentum in sales. And it was during this time that the local NGO decided to provide all cook stove entrepreneurs the opportunity to take advantage of a promotion. In this case, the promotion was that all entrepreneurs were able to purchase the cook stove at a decreased wholesale price. The interesting point here was it seemed that those who got the empowerment training were more likely to take advantage of the promotion, and that ultimately led to greater overall sales. We conducted 2 more promotions over the course of the follow-up period, and you see a very similar pattern result. In the very last stretch, where you have significant increases in sales, that last promotion, individuals were given the opportunity for employment by the NGO if they were able to demonstrate sales, and that really led to a significant increase. So overall, we found that the sales more than doubled in the intervention group, and individuals who received the intervention, the empowerment training, were nearly 3 times more likely to be high sellers of cook stoves. Next slide, please. So in addition to the increased sales, we also found improvements in retention. In this graph, we follow the percentage of viable businesses over time. That is, are the entrepreneurs still trying to reach out and sell, or have sold, and they are involved in their businesses? What we found is probably the most substantial drop in the first few months of the business. And we see over time it tends to decrease. But one of the things that we find is in the control group, we find a marked decrease over the course of 8 months. And at the end, less than 25% of the businesses were still viable after 8 months. Now, in sharp contrast, in the empowerment training, we found at the end of 8 months, more than 50% of the businesses were still functioning. So it nearly doubled the retention over the course of time. So as we are looking at the impacts of the training of trainer certification program, we were looking to see, were there changes in sales, were there changes in retention? Next slide, please. I think I'm passing this over to Alyssa now.
Thanks so much, Anita. So given these exciting results, you can see why we were enthusiastic about incorporating this approach into our program activities. So we did just that, seeking to roll this out at a larger scale while ensuring that it remained effective when applied by organizations, partner organizations themselves, rather than the Entrepreneur Handbook authors themselves. So we did this through 3 phases. The first phase was the trainer certification program, and I'll go into detail about what that entails on the next slide, but the focus was on developing in-house expertise to train sales staff and entrepreneur partners locally, and to provide trainers with tools and facilitation techniques, especially with a gender-sensitive lens. The second phase was when the certified trainers rolled out in their own networks this curriculum. And then the third phase, as discussed, the monitoring was an essential part of this project. We collected data on the impacts of the training curriculum, and as we are doing now, share the results with the sector. Next slide, please. So far to date, we've done 2 master trainer certifications, one in Nairobi in mid-2005 and one in Bangalore in early 2006. Through these 2 trainings, we've certified 47 master trainers from 20 different organizations in 8 countries, listed here, and all of them participated in the full certification process. That includes a pre-workshop homework and webinar participation to encourage complete buy-in with all of the requirements of getting certified, of which there were many. 5 full days of training, facilitation practice, action planning, and then the follow-up practicum that was mentioned. There's homework and exams and practice trainings to really make sure that the lessons have been fully absorbed before the rollout to the Entrepreneur Network. Through the Entrepreneur Network rollout, there have been over 500 entrepreneurs trained from those organizations that participated in the Master Trainer certification. Now, the M&A that we're going to present today on business indicators and personal growth of entrepreneurs have been over the past 6 months of post-training follow-up for the first training of trainers, the one in Kenya. The India certified trainers are still rolling out their trainings to their entrepreneur network, so we are not yet going to be presenting on that data. I would now like to turn the slides back over to Genevieve to talk about some support, innovative support that we've provided to the certified trainers as well as now to entrepreneurs on the next slide. Sorry, folks, we did have Genevieve back.
Hi, sorry about that.
Anita,
can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, great. Thank you, Genevieve. Go ahead.
Okay. Apologies for internet challenges. Great, thanks, Alyssa. So one of the additional things that we have been working on is using interactive voice response to provide remote training follow-up to the trainers that have gone through the Empowered Entrepreneur Training Program, and then also as well doing a pilot with entrepreneurs that have been trained in the Empowered Entrepreneur Training curriculum. And the interactive voice response goal, or using interactive voice response, the goals that we were trying to achieve were to reinforce the business, empowerment, and leadership concepts that were introduced, as well as the training methods that were practiced in the trainer certification program for the trainers. And we also wanted to share new ideas and suggestions from fellow trainers using interactive voice response and explore an alternative to costly in-person refresher trainers to help trainers stay on top of these different training concepts. And then finally, the original pilot with the trainers was done to determine whether it would be viable in utilizing similar messages directly with entrepreneurs that were supported by the Empowered Entrepreneur Training Program trainers. So we included topics of business, empowerment for trainers themselves, and then also for the trainers we discussed empowerment for the entrepreneurs and how they can support their entrepreneurs with the empowerment concepts. And then we also had trainers reflect on the leadership concepts for themselves, and again reflect on the leadership concepts for the entrepreneurs that they would be working with. So that training, or that original pilot with the trainers, went quite well. We had 34 trainers that were included in the pilot representing 8 different countries, and this occurred over a 5-week period. We shared about 25 tips altogether throughout those 5 weeks, and altogether there was about a 58% success rate, meaning that every week about 58% of the trainers that were engaged were listening to at least one tip and interacting with the interactive voice response system. And the platform that we were using is called Vodo Mobile, which is a service provider that has experience in working with development and research organizations to engage mobile phone users through voice and SMS messages. And so because of the success within that pilot program with trainers, we also did a pilot with entrepreneurs. And so we have been working with AEST, which was one of the organizations that participated in the Kenya Training of Trainers program, and are currently in the middle of that pilot program. So we've done about 4 weeks so far with the entrepreneurs, and thus far we've received very positive feedback from the entrepreneurs and from AEST in terms of the type of support that that system is being able to provide to them. Next slide, please. So the results of from the training rollout of the monitoring and evaluation that we've been trying to answer the question, which is it possible to get similar impacts to the randomized control trial that Anita talked about earlier in a real-world setting with the training of trainers design? So to answer this question, we collected qualitative qualitative and quantitative data. We have baseline and endline surveys for approximately 165 participating entrepreneurs, and we've also collected sales data as it has been available, and historical sales data as well, so we can understand the trends. And then on the qualitative side, we have been doing interviews with trainers, entrepreneurs, and organizational leadership to understand a bit more about the impacts of the training. Next slide, please. So the next slide.
There we go.
Great. So the participants that are the Empowered Entrepreneur Training participants in East Africa, as we mentioned before, this is where our current data is. As the India Empowered Entrepreneur Training Program participants, the data is not ready from that. So the data that we're sharing here is from the East Africa and Kenya training program in particular. And this shares the, this table illustrates the number of people that have been trained and the number that we have data for. So altogether, while the number of entrepreneurs added up in this table does not, it does not equal the total number that have been trained, which is over 500 entrepreneurs that have been trained. Again, this is just those entrepreneurs for which we have data. And this kind of illustrates here, and Anita will shortly walk through some of the more specifics of the data, but it walks through the fact that the different organizations employed the Empowered Entrepreneur Training Handbook differently depending upon the background of that organization in terms of what sort of trainings they've already done with entrepreneurs. So for example, Energy for Impact has already done business training extensively with the entrepreneurs that they're working with, and they also informed the Empowered Entrepreneur Training Handbook originally. And so they only did 3.5 days of empowerment and leadership, for example. So this table illustrates the different format for the organizations of using the Empowered Entrepreneur Training Handbook. And as you can see in the far to right columns, overall we've seen improved retention and improved sales for the entrepreneurs from these different organizations. And that's generally across the different organizations, although as you'll also see in the table, there are areas for which we do not have data. I'll now pass it back to Anita, who will walk through a bit more about the results of the training program and go into more of the specifics.
Okay, thank you. Next slide. Okay, great. So in our review of the data from the monitoring and evaluation process, we found improvements in the following areas: in increased sales and expansion of sales strategies, in increased retention rates, and increased promotion rates. So I'll describe a little bit about this, and I'll show a few graphs to illustrate this. So in the case of sales, we found for entrepreneurs, particularly in the group of Practical Action and SCODE, that there was an overall 15% increase in sales over time, and nearly 3 times more likelihood of becoming a higher seller of clean energy products. For Energy for Impact, they also observed significant increases in the rate of entrepreneurs in terms of them being higher sellers. One important point here was those who received the training were more likely to change their behavior and how they ran their business by taking on a range of different outreach strategies and worked together more effectively to build their businesses. In livelihoods, in terms of their retention rates, we found those that had underwent the Empowered Entrepreneur Training nearly doubled their tenure in their program. Practical Action and SCODE also found that retention rates improved significantly over time. One of the interesting things that we weren't quite expecting, but they also appear to be increases in promotion rates or shifts to a higher position. the example here is livelihoods, where they found that 35% of those who received their training were promoted, compared to approximately 5% of their agents in the past. Next slide, please. So here's a graph that compares the average income from sales of entrepreneurs who underwent the training compared to those who did not for practical action and SCODE. Now, we needed to do the analysis by organizations in order to feel confident that the entrepreneurs who had undergone the training experienced a similar training experience. In addition, in the case of practical action SCODE, we had concurrent controls that give us some indication of what the experience is of entrepreneurs who did not undergo the training and over the same period of time. From this graph, you can see, despite a very similar starting point, those who got the empowerment training consistently did better in their sales compared to their untrained counterparts. Next slide. In the next slide, what we're looking at is we determined the quartile rank of total sales at baseline to see kind of what the range of sales experiences were for the whole population of entrepreneurs. And then we compared what the percentages were at 6 months in time compared to those entrepreneurs who had gotten the empowerment training compared to those who didn't. And one of the nice things that we were able to find, just to clarify too, that those in the control group are in the blue, and in the red are those who got the empowerment training. So from this graph, you can see that if you got the empowerment training, there were fewer of those entrepreneurs that were still selling in the lowest quartile range. And through the middle, it's about the same. But the biggest difference that you're seeing is in the highest quartile. So if you got the empowerment training, to almost 20% of those trained entrepreneurs were now selling in that highest quartile, which is about $180 per month. And that's compared to only 3% of those who did not participate in the empowerment training. Next slide, please. So in addition to cook stove sales, we're also looking at a range of other sales, either within the clean energy sector, but also with fuels. So in this example of sales and briquettes, again through practical action and SCODE, we're able to see and illustrate kind of the shifts in retention over the 6-month follow-up period. And from this slide here, again, if the blue indicates those who did not receive the empowerment training, and the red indicates those who had. And if you follow the red line, you can see that not only have sales continued to go on over those 6 months, but they've also increased. And what, for those who had gotten the empowerment training. However, in the control group, at the end of the 6 months, only 10% of the original briquette sellers actually remained in that business. And that's compared to more than 50% of those who had gotten the empowerment training. Next slide, please. So we've talked a little bit about general sales, we've talked about retention. Now we're looking at kind of the shifts into becoming a higher seller. Now, Energy for Impact works with entrepreneurs who tend to have slightly more robust businesses in general. So if we looked at those data, to be a high seller, you generally needed to make more than $1,500 a month. And we followed the sales experience of about 40 entrepreneurs prior to the training and then post-training. And what we were able to find was that even though Energy for Impact has a very robust business training and support system, with the inclusion of the Empowered Entrepreneur training, that there was a significant increase in those sellers who are now reaching very high selling marks. And so after the before the entrepreneur training, the average percentage of entrepreneurs selling at the very high mark was about 32%. But afterward, after a very short period of time, on only 4 months of follow-up, that increased to 48% of entrepreneurs after the training. So not only are they generally increasing sales, but their capacity to become much higher sellers appears to be increasing. Okay, next slide, please. Great. Now, as Genevieve had mentioned, we had also conducted baseline and endline assessments, and these were to monitor changes in a number of characteristics related to their goal setting, their leadership and business activities. Specific to business-related activities, after 6 months, what we found is that individuals were more likely to keep records, they're more likely to provide after-sales service, and they were significantly more likely to increase the number of outreach strategies used in their business. So now I'm going to pass it along to Genevieve, who will describe some of the additional results from this monitoring and evaluation process, as well as the qualitative research results.
Great.
Genevieve, are you online?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thanks, Steve. Next slide, Liz.
Great. So in terms of the personal capacity of participants, we have seen that 70% of participants report being better off in a category related to economic well-being. And so these are things such as being able to feed their family, pay school fees, and pay rent. And as you can see in this table, the percent that report being better off vary, but for those three are average around 40%. And then 79% of participants report being better off in a category related to leadership qualities. And that includes abilities such as solving problems, communicating with mentors, supporting other entrepreneurs, communicating with others, setting and meeting sales goals, and feeling like a leader in their community. Next slide, please. So now I'm just going to talk briefly about one case study in particular, and this is appropriate energy saving technology, AEST, in Uganda, which is a women's social business to produce charcoal briquettes and cook stoves. In the Nairobi Empowered Entrepreneur Training Program, 2 trainers from AEST were trained, and those 2 trainers have since rolled out the training to 57 women in a 5-day training. Next slide, please. We have received strong results from this training. First, sales have increased substantially, and now women are selling approximately 10 to 20 cook stoves a week from just a few before the training. We've also seen that women's savings have increased, as well as reinvestments in their own business. And then also what a very exciting finding is that women are reporting feeling more empowered to do men's work. And this is something around doing the work in terms of machinery. And we've also heard that women have been asking for things such as overalls, so they're prepared for doing the work, which is something they hadn't necessarily been doing before. Next slide, please. We're now going to hear a bit from Sammy Katula, who is a trainer from Energy for Impact, and he'll report from some of the results himself. Alyssa?
Great. Here we go.
Okay. My name is Sammy Kitula. I work for an organization called Energy for Impact, and I'm based at the regional office in Nairobi. You may want to call me a trainer. for Energy for Impact. And I've been involved in the Empowered Entrepreneur Training Program since it started through contribution of training material, and I was one of the training of trainers, and I was accredited after some gruesome process of accreditation. So I'm a master trainer. The training is very interesting and quite unique. I'm an accredited trainer for various training tools. This was very unique because of the urgency part of it. And the format in which the training takes place is also quite different. It's not the normal kind of classroom training. There's a lot of soul searching that one has to go through. There's a lot of reflection on one's life that you need to look at. There's a lot of assertiveness and this burning desire to really take control of your life when you go through this particular training. It's totally unique. Personally, it did change me because I've become a very positive person since I underwent the training program. I was a pessimist in my life all along. I used to look at life as being half empty, but now I look at life as being half full or even completely full. And in very many instances, I found myself being an advocate for positivity, especially amongst my colleagues at work and also at home. I normally try to encourage people to look at life from the positive side, and everything is possible when you work hard at it and you push for it. I think one thing that I can say about the Empowered Entrepreneur Training Program, for my organization, we've decided that we are going to integrate it into our business development services model. We have a very strong BDS model, but then we want to incorporate parts of empowerment, especially empowerment and leadership, which we identified as a gap initially. And we participated in the research whose findings we are going to know today. But from our interaction, we've had very positive comments and feedback from the women who were trained. And we feel that it's going to enhance our training tool now and in future. All our future programming and our business development work is going to be based mostly on empowerment of women. And then we've made efforts to train all our business development services staff on the Empowered Entrepreneur Training Program. I've personally trained our staff members in Tanzania. I've trained our staff members in Kenya. I've trained our staff members in Senegal. And now they are good to go, and they would utilize the knowledge and skills that they got from this training to do the same and impart the same to the entrepreneurs that they work with on a day-to-day basis.
Back to you, Genevieve.
Thanks, Alyssa. Next slide, please. So just to end the webinar and before we open up for questions, I want to share some of the lessons learned and then also finally some of the next steps. So at the organizational level, having organizational buy-in and investment is really important. The training is time intensive and requires ongoing organizational support. And of course, going through the Empowered Entrepreneur Training Program itself for the trainers takes a long period of time, including the pre-training homework, the TOT itself, and the practicum period. So it's important that the organizations understand the benefits from the training and are invested in making sure their trainers and the trainings are successful. Secondly is related to the retention of trainers. Organizations should envision this training as a longer-term integration into their core activities, and they should send trainers with a longer tenure at the organization. Some of the challenges that we had were that trainers who were going through the Empowered Entrepreneur Training Program, they did not stay with the organization, and so it made it hard for them to do those Empowered Entrepreneur training activities later on, as they didn't have certified trainers any longer. And previous training experience is important for those attending the training of trainers in order to have best results. We find that many organizations in the household energy sector don't have significant training beyond the technical currently, and so there's huge opportunities for growth and leadership. And also, the high sales staff and entrepreneur turnover is very challenging. Training can be expensive and time-intensive, and so of course this can be difficult. However, as mentioned previously, there has been evidence that this training leads to greater retention and therefore improves the bottom line and business case. Next slide, please. In terms of the training schedule and rollout, we've found that flexibility is really important. The full 6-day training, especially to do 6 days in a row for a training program, is often unrealistic for organizations as well as for women entrepreneurs and sales agents themselves, especially if they have businesses that they need to run. And so we had organizations that conducted the 6 days training in flexible ways. So for example, some organizations would do 2 days for 3 weekends in a row, or do 3-day weekends 3 days over a weekend over a month period of time, for example. So having that flexibility and being aware of your participants' needs is really important. And then ongoing support needs beyond the training, of course, is critical for trainers and for entrepreneurs. For the trainers, we found that it's really essential to keep them engaged through the post-training homework, through the Vodo mobile tips and guidance, and also through a WhatsApp group that we send messages to our trainers through. And for entrepreneurs, we found that it's also important to have ongoing reflection on the material. This can be done through mentorship or having peer buddies, for example. But we heavily encourage organizations to participate and who conduct these trainings to provide ongoing support to entrepreneurs and to have mentors or coaching for their entrepreneurs so they can have this ongoing reflection and support. And there's a need to further explore and understand what types of follow-up support are most effective as well as most cost-effective. And then finally, for enterprises and organizations, there's an ongoing need to prove and share the business case. So including beyond sales, such as understanding more so the business case for retention and promotion potential and what the return on investment can be. As training budgets are often the first to go, understanding the return on investment for doing a training can be important in convincing and encouraging companies and organizations to invest in this training and conduct the training. Next slide, please. The next steps for the Empowered Entrepreneur Training Programs, first is to continue to support organizations in rolling out the training programs, and that's through coaching calls and advice on agendas. We're still working with some of the organizations in India on these sorts of things. And then we have the ongoing pilot with AEST offering the Vodo support to AEST entrepreneurs. As I mentioned previously, we're in week 4 of this pilot with the Vodo support, and we're eager to learn more about the specific outcomes from this pilot. We're also interested in doing ongoing Vodo support to trainers. So we conducted the One Vodo pilot with trainers from both the India and Kenya training of trainer programs, and we heard from them that they found it very encouraging and helpful, and also that they would appreciate quarterly Vodo support calls in order to continue to reflect on these training concepts and have that sort of assistance that they've described as a mentor voice that comes to their phone through the Vodo support. And then lastly, we'll have an upcoming trainer certification program in Nairobi, Kenya later this month with additional clean cooking organizations as well as training institutions to try to build up more opportunities for organizations and companies to access trained or certified trainers for this training material. Next slide, please. And now we'd like to open it up to questions from the audience.
So, audience webinar participants, if you could please enter your questions now into the questions pane of your webinar console and send those in. I will read them out loud to our presenters, and we'll get started with a question for Genevieve. Genevieve, if I were part of the Vodo pilot, can you give an example of a message that I might receive?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as mentioned before, there were topics of business, empowerment, and leadership. And so for the empowerment section, one of the topics would be on overcoming limiting beliefs. And so what you would do is you would get a call that would come to your phone, and for the trainers, you could select listening to a belief or listening to a message on overcoming limiting beliefs. And that message would discuss some of the core concepts related to limiting beliefs and pose a question to you to continue to reflect on that concept. Another example, from the business section would be how to do marketing with a gender lens. And so this call would talk about ways to utilize a gender lens in order to do more effective marketing for your entrepreneurs, and how to help your entrepreneurs understand what a gender lens is and apply that to marketing. So those are just some of the examples, one from the business and one from the empowerment. And of course, we can send out more information on those if people are interested in the details.
Thanks, Genevieve. The next question is, what is the investment for the organization to participate in the training? Maybe just talk through the different steps of the trainer certification process.
Okay,
Sure.
this is a neat. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Just in terms of the time investment, as everyone's talked about this already, we have tried to set up a fairly robust training and practice curriculum. This is not only to ensure that individuals get exposed enough to these concepts and ideas, but this will only be most effective if people are able to use these concepts and principles in their lives and they're starting to see a shift. So in order to do that, we have a kind of a pre-homework set of assignments prior to the training, which is approximately 5 to 6 hours prior to the actual in-person training. The investment in time for the in-person training is 5 full days, where we cover the contents of the business, the agency-based empowerment, and the leadership pieces, as well as help organizations as they create their context-specific curriculum for their entrepreneurs. After that 5-day period, we have approximately a 1 month post-training homework period where we cover each of the key topics, and particularly around the behavior change and the agency-based empowerment topics. We have a process where they do the homework and we provide specific feedback to ensure that they've understood the concepts well enough and can communicate that. This certification process is facilitated through a learning management platform that's based at Johns Hopkins University that allows us to follow and track homework assignments and provide feedback. We also have a certification exam, which each trainer needs to pass with a score of at least 80% or more, and they can take it as many times as they want to, but again, the idea is to ensure that they're having a strong grasp of the materials. We also strongly encourage and support practice trainings, especially when they're doing the topics around the agency-based empowerment, because it's often very different from other technical trainings that they've done in the past. And so we are there to coach them prior to, sometimes even during, and then do a post-training debrief to kind of address any challenges that happen during the course of that. So in terms of the time investment, that's probably the best description around that. In terms of the cost, then the investment is depending on each organization and how many days and the format that empowerment training is going to take. Again, any one training is not going to be sufficient to build these skills. It's that regular follow-up, the regular reinforcement of the principles that's going to start leading to the kind of shifts that you want to see. Genevieve or Alyssa, if you want to add to that?
No, I think that was clear.
Yep, nope, that's it from my end. The next question is, do you have any experience with a society that limits women's participation in sales? Maybe one of you could talk about the experience in Indonesia so far.
Right. So I can talk a little bit about the importance of engaging other members of the household and or kind of the opinion leaders in the local community to help support women's engagement in the sales process. I think it is really an important question to not assume that you're just working with the women independently is going to work in all areas. It is important to engage men and others in the society to help support not only the women but also the larger ideas of sales and equity in that community. In the past, we have kind of started this process where there's enough conversation and rapport building with either the men head of households or others in the community so that they are included in the process. They're not excluded in the decision-making process or the discussions around the engagement of women. Sometimes it's a slow start, but over time, as households and individuals start seeing the value of engaging in these kinds of activities to the family, you see that more families are willing to take this on. Genevieve, do you have any additional things you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, mainly that, as mentioned before, the handbook is designed to work with organizations or companies that are already working with women entrepreneurs or sales agents as well. And so within the Empower Entrepreneur training program, the organizations and companies that participated already have a network or women or select women entrepreneurs or sales agents that they work with. And we really relied heavily on the expertise of those organizations in helping them design their trainings. As I mentioned before, the human-centered design process is an important part of our training program, and it's through that human-centered design process that we really work with the organizations to understand the unique challenges that they face and the women that they work with face to make sure that the training is as successful as possible and is adapted to their needs.
Great, thank you. We have several different questions asking, when is the next training of trainers? How can I do this with my organization? How do I coordinate with you to make sure that I'm taking best advantage of the materials and program that you've developed? I'm going to leave that to you two too, and then I'll add on.
Well, the next Training of Trainers program that has been kind of set is going to be in February, and it's going to be in Nairobi. The participants for that training have already been selected, and the idea for that Training of Trainers was to try to build local capacity from an actual training organization group. So this will be working with Strathmore, which is based in Nairobi, and their job is as trainers and to kind of build their capacity to understand the curriculum, and then they can be used as a resource to train others that are in the region. Our hope is also to continue to be able to get some additional support for training of trainers in West Africa and hopefully elsewhere in the globe, and we'll definitely keep you up to date as that progresses.
Yeah, and I guess just one thing to add. Oh, go ahead, Alyssa.
No, I'll go after you. Go ahead.
Okay, sure. You know, if you are interested in doing this training or in a future training of trainers, of course, it's helpful to know so that we can be aware of that and send out future application and invitations as they come up. And then also in terms of how you coordinate to make sure you take advantage of the materials we've developed, again, the best thing and easiest thing to do is reach out to us so that we're aware of your interest in it, and then we can work with you to understand if there's other sort of tools that we have that might be relevant and applicable for you.
Thank you, Genevieve. And also just to add on to what Anita said about the upcoming training and how that master certification training is a little bit different than what we've done in the past, our prior training of trainer workshops specifically trained trainers from individual organizations who were then planning to roll out the training within their own entrepreneur network. And acknowledging that the Developing a Sustainable Cookstove Sector project is coming to an end later this year, we're hoping to leave behind, as part of our legacy, more independent trainers who are then available to multiple organizations to receive the training. So it was part of the intention of having this different kind of training next month, that there will be more certified trainers out there that organizations can bring in to run their training. We have a question on how can we get the resources mentioned within the webinar. Genevieve, do you want to mention where to find the handbook and related resources online?
Yeah, absolutely. So the handbook is housed on the Global Alliance for Clean Cookstoves website. The Alliance is the organization that financed the development of the handbook and also invested in the original research behind the agency-based empowerment methodology. And so that link can be sent out to participants following the webinar, and it includes the human-centered design plan, the participant packet, as well as the handbook itself.
Great, thanks. And because the Alliance made the decision to provide that as an open source document, it really is available for organizations to adopt and run with, and as we have done, develop it into a whole trainer certification program. One more question. Can you suggest how to conduct needs assessment with regard to internal ability and agency empowerment to determine what level each woman, the level of different women's disempowerment?
So that's a very interesting question. So there are a number of different metrics, psychometric scales that could be used if you wanted to do a formal assessment of their sense of self-efficacy, their positive relatedness to others, their mastery of their environment. Oftentimes these scales have better utility in more academic environments and settings. One of the things that we have found in this research is no matter where people are with respect to their sense of self or their sense of agency or sense of empowerment, there is always room for improvement and ability to move forward. The way this training has been designed is to hopefully meet people where they are and give them the tools to continue to improve and get better for themselves. And for each individual, you'll find that your sense of agency, your sense of well-being can differ not only in your stage of life or your experiences, but it can fluctuate through the course of your career, and depending on if, for example, there's a major stressor that occurs. And so the tools that are being taught here are actually applicable to all of us, because it kind of gives us the strategies to strengthen our personality capabilities wherever we are at the point that we're looking at it. So it increases our awareness to do that. If anyone is interested in some of these metrics, I'm happy to share them as well. One of the things that we need to keep in mind around empowerment is what empowerment means for one person can be different than what it means to someone else. So for one person, it could be feeling empowered as speaking, responding back to their authority figure or their husband about how they feel about a particular situation. For another person, it could be asking for a raise for a job. So again, it's somewhat tricky concept to be able to track with with data. But I'm happy to share whatever I have.
I also just want to add as well, the Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves recently launched their social impact how-to guide, which includes metrics in a section on empowerment and agency-based empowerment. So that would also be another resource to look into.
Great. Thanks, both of you. We have a number of additional questions. We'll see how many we can get through in the next 10 minutes. I have two related questions about coaching and mentorship. One question says, what are some of the coaching and mentorship elements that can be extracted from the Empowered Entrepreneur Training Program? And then another question says, please comment more on coaching and mentorship support. Here in Kenya, we are finding there's an expectation of a certain level of hand-holding post Empowered Entrepreneur Training. Are there plans for an Empowered Entrepreneur Coaching and Mentorship Handbook?
It's a great idea. I think that's a really excellent idea. And I think that we should work on putting that together. I just want to make sure I understood the specific question around that. I think in order for these concepts to embed themselves well, there is a need for the regular review and revision of how we're thinking about these concepts so that they're actually being integrated in our lives. And I think that it's like building a habit or building a muscle. And so it's absolutely required. If we don't check in and if we don't ensure that these ideas and concepts are being used, you'll find that people forget and they kind of revert back to how things were. Yeah, so I think that's an excellent idea. I think we should work on providing coaching and mentoring. Again, there are some important skills to help coaches and mentors to better facilitate interactions with entrepreneurs. And there's certain type of language, certain types of questions that do that more efficiently. We've been looking into that to some extent with recent research that we've been involved in, but I think that needs to be, if it's made into a manual, I think it would be very helpful. And so yes, yeah, I agree with that.
And just to add a bit to that, in terms of what are some of the coaching and mentorship elements that are occurring currently in the way that EETP is structured, for trainers in the Empowered Entrepreneur Training Program are all assigned peer buddies with other members of their organization or company that help kind of continue to coach each other. And so part of the training program is we actually teach the trainers how to do some coaching on some of the concepts related to the handbook, specifically concepts related to the empowerment pieces and limiting beliefs, which is one of the sections in the handbook. And so we've really been building out coaching methods for trainers for that particular piece in the training programs. And then in addition, from us, from Anita and myself, as well as the Winrock team, we have ongoing coaching calls with the different trainers from the organizations following the in-person training of trainer program to make sure they really get the material, and if they have any questions on certain pieces, especially as they're kind of planning their own training program, we want to make sure they really understand the different pieces. And then, of course, the interactive voice response system and Vodo we see as providing ongoing mentorship as well. So that's kind of specific to trainers. And then for entrepreneurs, because for the Empowered Entrepreneur Training Program, because we're working directly with trainers, of course, it's hard to directly apply coaching and mentorship to those entrepreneurs. And that's why we've been utilizing Vodo and IVR in order to provide some of those messages and serve as sort of a mentorship tool towards entrepreneurs, as we don't have direct contact with them. We do encourage in the Human-Centered Design Plan for entrepreneurs to be assigned peer buddies, as well as also for mentorship. As we've mentioned before, we understand that it's critical to have those ongoing touch points, and we try to provide that through the voice response system, but also the in-person pieces are quite critical as well.
Great, thank you. Here's another couple of great questions. Was there a conscious gender strategy in the pilot program? How many women were trained? I think pilot program just refers to our initial activities rather than the Vodo pilot. And how many women were trained?
So most of the organizations that we worked with had a women-centric focus. There were men that had participated as well, although that really wasn't the focus. There's no reason for men not to be included in the original randomized control trial. We had both men and women. What we found was that this particular training, especially the agency-based empowerment training, was particularly effective for women. Sales also did increase for men as well, but we understand that women have specific skills and needs that we wanted to make sure we addressed. And yeah, so that's, I don't have anything else on that. Maybe Genevieve?
Yeah, just one thing I would like to say. So in the original handbook, we had sort of business, empowerment, and leadership as kind of the three sections. And of course, those are still the three main sections. But we've also pulled out in the newer version that we did after the first program in Nairobi, we also pulled out the introduction as well as the lesson plans on sex and gender into their own section and built those up a bit more. To really make sure that those kind of lesson plans were reinforced and central to a training program. And then within the actual Empowered Entrepreneur training programs and the TOTs we do with trainers, we do discuss with them gender-sensitive training techniques, and the Human-Centered Design Plan, again, reflects on, includes components on gender to help trainers reflect on different gender components to adapt and ensure that their training is designed for men and women that they work with, and particularly effective for the women that they work with.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. This one is, could you please comment on the timeline between doing the master certification workshop and the rollout and the refresher support that trainers have been given? And I guess let's answer that on average for our partner organizations to date.
Sure, I'm happy to take the first answer to this. So for the trainer certification workshop, 2 to 3 weeks prior to the in-person TOT, their trainers sign up on a learning management platform, so it's like a Moodle course that they have to complete some pre-training of trainer program materials and homework. And then they arrive at the in-person 5-day TOT, and then there's the month post, which is the practicum, and then we expect trainers to then implement the training with their organizations pretty soon after that practicum. So 1 month post TOT, that's when we'll start seeing some of these trainings occurring. One of the final assignments that is required during that month period post TOT is their agenda and their schedule when they want to complete the training. And so, of course, this varies by organization. Some will complete the training right after that 1 month period. Others need some more time to plan the training and conduct it. The refresher support in terms of the interactive voice response, the pilot occurred about 3 months after the training in India, and several more months after the training in Nairobi. As mentioned before, because of the interest from trainers and the feedback that we've gotten, we'd like to start doing quarterly IVR voice support and refresher support if possible as well.
All right, that question actually had a part 2, which I'm going to go ahead and ask since we technically have 2 minutes left. Do you have a way of evaluating the capacity of the trainers after some time, or are we just checking the impacts of the initial training and monitoring entrepreneur sales?
So at this time, we don't have a formal process to check the capacity of trainers. However, it is possible to review the certification processes that were put in place after the Training of Trainers program to see how well those trainers are doing. Again, I think that's an important idea to have. And again, as Genevieve was mentioning, we've really tried to design this whole program with a human-centered design perspective so that each organization can determine what are the key aspects of this training that are most important to assess and be used for their entrepreneurs. And certainly the components of understanding that and kind of the metrics that were used to assess the competency of trainers in the beginning can be used in the future as well. But I think that's a very important piece. Again, Genevieve and I have made ourselves as available as we can for anyone who's been trained to get greater feedback, even to have another coaching call. I think regular review of capacities is very, very important because you do have drift over time in concepts, and it's important to get a recheck to ensure that you are familiar with each of the principles and are conveying them correctly.
Genevieve, any last comments before we wrap up?
On that note, I mean, we do have a trainer quiz that's part of the certification process that is asked after the in-person TOT and during the 1 month period of time. And because of the open source nature of the handbook, we don't have that kind of ongoing certification check-in sort of tool. But again, I think there are various areas for improvement and continued development with the handbook and with the different supports of the handbook that we're continuing to think about as well and appreciate the advice and support of others.
Great. Thank you, Genevieve. I would now like to thank all of our presenters for your sharing this information today. I'd like to thank Genevieve and Anita for all of your work with the Alliance on developing the handbook, the Alliance for supporting the development of it, and Genevieve and Anita, thank you for all your hard work in working with Winrock and USAID to develop this larger training program. Again, want to acknowledge my colleague Katie Gross here at Winrock, who put a tremendous amount of work into this as well. And of course, thank Pam and USAID for continuing to support all of this work, both financially and spiritually, and technically and in every other way. Thank you to all of you on the line for attending the webinar. We will follow up with some resources by email in the next day or two. Again, thanks everyone for participating. Thanks, Liz, for running it, and we can now end the webinar. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank